Well, greetings, everyone. Delighted to be with you today. My name is Todd Wilson, and it's a privilege and an honor for me to have a few minutes to be able to teach and share with you some reflections on the wisdom of the Enneagram. As I understand from Tommy Lee, a number of you, many of you know already of the Enneagram, and it sounds like many of you are enthusiastic, excited about the Enneagram. So that's fantastic. I am as well, and look forward to sharing with you my own journey in discovering the Enneagram and how the Enneagram has been a huge help to me in life and ministry. I am doing this from my study at our home in Indianapolis. And I understand many of you are spread out literally all around the world. So greetings and blessings to you wherever the Lord has you serving, and pray that you are thriving in life and in ministry. I have just a few slides to share with you, and I've entitled this presentation, The Wisdom of the Enneagram, a tool for pastors and ministry leaders. Really, I see it as a tool for Christians in general. And for people in general, because there is so much wisdom in the Enneagram that is accessible to us, I think, and applicable in so many ways, whether you're a marketplace leader or a business person, or you're in the medical field, or wherever the Lord has you, church leadership or lay leadership in your church. There is just so much wisdom and fruit to be had in the Enneagram. So we'll look forward to sharing with you more about the Enneagram. The reflections I'll be sharing today come at least in part from the book that I have written entitled The Enneagram Goes to Church, which we are recording this on March 15th, Monday, and it drops tomorrow, Tuesday, March 16th. So very excited to share that with you. In fact, my publisher just sent me a mug, an Enneagram mug, to celebrate the launch of the book. I don't know if you can see that, but it's got an 8 on this side, and it says 8ish, and I know it on this side, as a sort of congratulations on the publication of the book. I am an 8 in the Enneagram, and so they sent that. Thought that would be fun. But encourage you to grab a copy of this book. There's a ton of I think helpful things about pastoral ministry and church leadership. In fact, I have someone on my launch team I just talked to today, as a matter of fact, earlier today, who said that they really hoped that it would be sort of categorized not simply as a church resource book for pastors, but this person was saying this is really a book about leadership, and was hoping that it would kind of have a broader audience in leadership circles. So whether you are serving in active full-time ministry or not, I hope this will be a useful tool to you. Well, I've got 3 questions I thought we could talk about today. And the first is, how did I get into the Enneagram? Second is, what is the Enneagram? And the third question is, how can you benefit from the Enneagram? But I thought it might be worthwhile for me just to share a little bit about the Enneagram and my own journey with it. And I want to start with an honest confession. My wife and I, a number of years ago, were on a walk through our neighborhood. At the time, we were living in Oak Park, Illinois, where I pastored a church for 10 years. And it was regular for us. We'd go for walks a couple of times a week. And there was no set agenda, but we would often review sort of like how things were going in life, and how the kids were doing, and how we were doing in our marriage, and how our spiritual life was going. And we were walking down Pleasant Avenue in Oak Park, and half a mile from our home. And the thought suddenly occurred to me, and I don't know where it came from. It just sort of sprung into my mind. But this was the thought, and it really was a confession. And I let it out of my mouth as though I was confessing something. Katie, I said, "Wow, Katie, you know what? I would have been a much better pastor if I would have known the Enneagram. I would have been a much better pastor if I would have known the Enneagram." And she heard that and she said, wow, tell me more about that. And so we began to unpack that. I had been a senior pastor for about probably 7 or 8 years by that point. I had been in pastoral ministry for nearly 15 years at that point, and I was a good pastor in many ways. I mean, I was saying that not because I felt like I was a loser pastor. Things were going very well at my congregation, and so it wasn't flowing from a sense of deficiency as a pastor, but it was really flowing from a sense of missed opportunity, because I'd come to appreciate the wisdom of the Enneagram, and man, I just thought to myself, this would have been so helpful to me as a tool in pastoral ministry. I had a very good theological education. I had a bachelor's degree in philosophy, a master's degree in biblical studies, a PhD in New Testament studies from Cambridge University. I had published books. I had interned at fantastic churches. I had great mentors in ministry. I knew a lot about preaching and Christian education, and I knew all kinds of stuff that you would learn in a seminary setting about how to lead a church. Had good exposure, but where I was underdeveloped, where I had a lot more to learn, was about people. I had a lot of knowledge, but what I lacked was wisdom about people and how they work. And as you know, if you've spent any time in a church, church is about a lot of things. It's about the gospel, it's about God, it's about the mission of the church and the world, but it's at its core, it is the communion of saints, as the creeds will put it. It is about people. And so being a pastor, being a ministry leader, being someone who's engaged in the life of the church requires a wisdom about people. And so, man, I wish I would have known the Enneagram earlier on. Part of it was I was an unlikely Enneagram convert. I was from a theological background and tradition and a church world where, I was more likely to listen to sermons by Tim Keller and read books by John Piper and go to conferences like the Gospel Coalition than I was necessarily to grab an Enneagram book and read up on the Enneagram. In fact, I would have sort of viewed some of that as psychobabble, like, oh, that makes me a little nervous, all this psychology and personality stuff. It wasn't until I bumped into the Enneagram on a family vacation, actually, that I really became a convert. My wife's sister, Beth, had gotten exposure to the Enneagram, and she had brought on this family vacation with my wife's extended family. It was probably 5 or 6 years ago now. She had brought a copy of a book about the Enneagram with her. And I said, well, Beth, I could tell she was intensely reading. And I said, well, Beth, what's this book about? What is this you're reading so earnestly? She turned it over and showed me. And if you've ever seen, many of you have seen the Enneagram diagram, right? And I saw it for the first time and I thought, that looks like a pentagram. I'm thinking to myself, is my sister-in-law into Satanism? What's going on here? And I said, well, Beth, what on earth is that? And she said, well, it's a book about the Enneagram. And I said, the Ennea what? And she said, the Enneagram. I said, what is that? And she said, well, it's a personality typing system. And it's got these 9 different personality types. And I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. And she started to describe them. She started to describe like a 1 in the Enneagram and a 2 and a 3, the different types, 9 different personality types. And as she started explaining them, I was starting to get a little more intrigued. I said, well, do we know any of these types that you're talking about? And she said, well, yes, my mom, your mother-in-law, is a 1 in the Enneagram. So, wow. And she said, and your mother is a 2 in the Enneagram, really? And she started describing it. All of a sudden, I started to get very intrigued. And then Katie and I, my wife, we started talking with her about it and applying the insights of the Enneagram as we were learning it to our own lives and our own marriage. And that started kind of opening up insights and observations. And Katie and I are the parents of 7 children, 8 ranging at ages from 20 to 12. So we started taking the Enneagram and thinking about our kids in light of the insights of the Enneagram, and wow, really started to unfold all kinds of interesting observations and insights about their different personalities and why they interact and respond the way they do and how we interact with them. This was all happening over the course of about a year or two, kind of getting to know the Enneagram. And I asked myself, well, what would happen if we like took the Enneagram to church and started applying some of the insights of the Enneagram to my pastoral context and the ministry team that I work with and the elder board that I work with and the congregation as a whole. And that is when it really started to unlock some powerful, powerful insights for me in ministry. I can remember very vividly a ministry staff retreat that we had that was marked by laughter and tears. Each year we would do a ministry staff retreat with the ministry team at Calvary, both the ministry leader and their spouse. And we'd go away for a couple of days and just spend time on retreat, resting, rejuvenating. We would spend the mornings together talking about something, praying, reading scripture. Well, this particular retreat, we decided we were going to have a conversation about the Enneagram, but not really about the Enneagram. We were going to use the Enneagram to talk about who we are as people. So I had all the ministry staff and their spouses read a little bit about the Enneagram, try to identify their type, their personality type, and then come together. We're going to discuss. And what we did on the first day, we took about 4 hours, and it was about 14 to 16 of us. We sat around a circle, and here was the question we discussed. What is it like to be you? What is it like to be you? And over the next couple of hours, each person took a turn describing what it's like to be inside their head and engaging in the world, using the language of the Enneagram so we could all sort of have a common vocabulary. And it was filled with laughter as we got to know each other better in a really profound and intimate ways. And it was filled with tears because there were some really tender, vulnerable moments in that time of sharing and conversation that knit our hearts together in such a beautiful way. The next day, we discussed this question. On day one, it was, what is it like to be you? On day two, this question, what is it like to be married to you? And that really was a day full of laughter and tears as we sort of peeled the onion back all the more to get into each other's lives and to get into each other's hearts. Just incredible bonding relational time. And I came away from that staff retreat really thoroughly convinced of the power of the Enneagram to unlock the human personality in a way that's very accessible to people and encouraging and yet challenging, showing not only the gold of our personality, if you will, but the shadow of our personality as well, and how we interact and intersect with each other, and how we can do that with wisdom and humility and kindness and compassion. Last thing I want to mention about how I got into the Enneagram was it came at a really opportune time in my life where I was on a journey toward what I call integration as a person. Integration. For years, I had been, striving to live a very Christ-centered Christian life. I had been a Christian for about 25 years at the time when I discovered the Enneagram, and I was a faithful Bible reader and devotional habits. I was a pastor of a church and the whole 9 yards, and felt like I had a very vibrant spiritual life and spiritual disciplines and all the rest of it. But what I realized as I was approaching midlife toward, late 30s and early 40s, was there was a dimension of who I was as a person that was not being fully addressed by the spiritual practices and disciplines I developed. Not that the Spirit of Christ can't penetrate down into the depths of who we are as people, but the way I was approaching some of that work was not as fruitful as I knew it could be and wanted it to be. I like to put it this way sometimes, that I was pursuing holiness, but I knew there was a lack of wholeness to who I was as a person. There was a lack of full integration of who I was as a person, where I was able to combine the spiritual formation that I was pursuing for years as a Christian with a kind of psychological healing and maturity as a person. The Enneagram came along and really helped me grow in that sort of way and pursue greater and greater integration. helping me become a more whole person, helping me be more attuned to the shadow side of my personality, and really helping unlock new pathways and avenues of growth for me, person, as a pastor, as a husband, and as a father. And so the Enneagram's been a great tool for me, and I suspect many of you who are listening in on this can resonate with some of the things that I've shared, and no doubt you have found yourself on a similar journey and path with the Enneagram and have found it to be a helpful tool. I want to transition now and share with you just a few thoughts about what is the Enneagram. Again, I understand that many of you, perhaps most of you, are familiar with the Enneagram. At least you've heard of the Enneagram. And so some of what I'm going to say here is not going to be new, but some of it I suspect might be at least fresh, perhaps a new insight on the Enneagram. The Enneagram, just basic way of putting it is a personality typing system where there are these 9 personality types in the Enneagram, and not very creatively. They go by the 9 numbers: type 1, type 2, type 3, around the circle of the Enneagram. 9 different types, and they have different names and different kind of features. The 1 is the perfectionist, and they go by different names, but the 2 is the helper, the 3 is the achiever, the 4 is the sometimes called the romantic, the 5 the investigator, the 6 is the loyalist, the 7 the adventurer, the 8 the challenger, and the 9 the peacemaker. These 9 personality types. And that's at root what the Enneagram is a personality typing system. But if you go down a layer, what you discover, I've been surprised at how seldom this is talked about, even by experienced Enneagram teachers. But if you go down a layer, what you discover is the deeper logic of the Enneagram. And this is the deeper logic of the Enneagram I want to share with you that I hope you will find helpful. In other words, why is it, let me ask it this way, why are there 9 personality types, not 6 personality types, or 12 personality types, or 2 personality types, or 4 personality types? The answer to that is because there are 3 dimensions to the human personality: thinking, feeling, and doing. And Enneagram theory of personality suggests that we put those 3 dimensions of personality together in 3 different ways. And so there's this combination of thinking, feeling, and doing that makes up each of the 9 personality types. And so 3 times 3, 9 different personality types. And this is where there is real powerful insight in the Enneagram, is thinking about your personality type as either leading with thinking, feeling, or doing. That is to say, you step into the room, you step into a situation, you wake up in the morning, and you're either someone who feels your way through life, or you think your way through life, or you do your way through life. And then Enneagram theory says you support that with either thinking, feeling, or doing. And then you tend to drop or neglect a 3rd dimension. So for example, I'm an 8 in the Enneagram, a challenger. And that means that I lead with doing. I step into the world, I step into a situation, I walk into a room, and I instinctively am thinking about what to do. Then I support that with thinking, which makes 8s good strategic people, makes 8s good visionaries, it makes 8s good at justifying their behavior, what they want to do. But then I tend to drop feeling. So it's hard for me to access what I am feeling. Each of the personality types does this differently than the way I do it: leading with doing, then thinking, then feeling. So a 4, for example, the romantic, leads with feeling, backs it up with thinking, and then drops doing, for example. Each of the, and as you grapple with this, there's great spiritual formation and personal development that can happen in thinking about how your personality gets constructed around these 3 different dimensions. So that's the deeper logic of the Enneagram that I hope will be helpful to you. Last point I want to make is to think about the Enneagram as a wisdom tradition. So at the surface, it's a personality typing system, but I really like to think about it as a wisdom tradition. That is to say, it's a stockpile of wise insights into the way human beings work. It's in a sense like the book of Proverbs, where what is the book of Proverbs in scripture? It is a stockpile. It's a piece of wisdom literature, we call it. And it's a stockpile. It's a collection of wise insights into life, really. That's what Proverbs is. God-centered perspective. And so too the Enneagram, I think, is on analogy like that. It is a stockpile. It is a collection of insights into the human person that has accumulated over the years. And we don't know exactly the origin of the Enneagram, exactly where it came from and how it all developed. But what we now have in the modern version of the Enneagram is a stockpile of these wise insights into what it means to be a human being. And I think this is what makes it such an exciting tool for ministry leaders and pastors and those who care about working with other people and doing that well and living wisely in the world. Is just such a wonderfully rich resource for you in thinking about relationships that you have. So that's the Enneagram. And let me close our time together with just a few brief comments about how you can benefit from the Enneagram. And I hope this is just a, if you're new to the Enneagram or a little bit familiar but not fully dialed in, hopefully this will be an incentive or an encouragement for you to dig a little deeper. Perhaps grab a copy of my book and dig deeper there. There are other resources that you can lay hold of that will be very helpful to you as well. I just try to capture the benefits of the Enneagram for you in a few words. And the first is freedom. Freedom. The Enneagram can benefit you by helping you be yourself in life and ministry. As a pastor, and as now in the work I do with the nonprofit that I lead, as a pastor of pastors who works with ministry leaders literally all around the country, I know pretty well the pressure and the challenge, the struggle that many pastors have with just being themselves in life and ministry, because there's a lot of pressure associated with the pastoral calling. Pastors are to be a certain kind of person, and if you don't fit that profile, well, you're not quite doing it right. Pastors, I know, feel that intensely. And the Enneagram can be a great help in that regard, in freeing you up to realize that what Christ is calling you to is to be you to the fullest Christ-centered way possible, in the fullest Christ-centered way possible. Not to try to be somebody else who you admire in ministry, but to be you. And the Enneagram frees you, gives you permission to lean into who you are as a person, how God has wired you up. And not just for ministry leaders, but for all of us who struggle with our identity and who we are in our individual personality. So freedom. Related to that is compassion. Looking with having freedom in the way you view yourself and letting yourself be who you are as God has made you in life and ministry, but compassion to let others be who they are in life and in ministry. Man, we can be we can struggle with a kind of judgmentalism about other people, it seems to me. We can absolutize our personality as the right way to be or the best way to be. We can moralize other people's personalities when their personality is a little different than our personality. When they approach the world differently than we do, it's very tempting for all of us to moralize that, to not treat it as a matter of personality difference, but to treat it as a moral issue, namely a moral deficiency on their part, right? If they've got an aggressive personality, we might conclude that they're not very humble, when maybe it has to do more with who they are in their personality, the way they're wired. Or perhaps they've got a more quiet personality, and we might moralize and say, well, they don't have faith, or they don't have spiritual courage and confidence. And it may be more a function of their personality. One of the great gifts of the Enneagram is that it helps you look on other people who are different than you with compassion. It helps you let them be who they are in life and ministry. Thirdly, touch on this briefly because it's been in much of what I've already shared, is wisdom. The Enneagram is a great tool. It's like a compass, help you navigate the deep differences there are between people in the world and help you navigate those differences well. The Enneagram is a marvelous tool. Man, I wish I would have known the Enneagram when I was a pastor. It would have helped me so much navigate relationships in my congregation and leadership. And fourthly and finally, we've also touched on this, but I want to leave you with this final thought: integration. Integration. The Enneagram, for my money, is perhaps the most helpful tool, in addition or apart from scripture and classic spiritual disciplines, the most helpful tool I've come across to help a person, help me personally, and I suspect you and I know others, to move toward being a more holy and whole person, helping you unpack the shadow side of your personality, those dimensions of your person that you can't just pray away. You can't just read a scripture verse and have that dimension of your personality that you struggle with just suddenly be cured or solved. The Enneagram really shines the light on that, but in a life-giving and helpful way. And so I commend the Enneagram to you, whether you are unfamiliar with it or relatively new to it. For all of these reasons, it's a marvelous, marvelous resource for life and for ministry.